Welcome to Dreamforce 2018. All right, who's pumped up for this? This is day one. Come on, let's get excited. This is the super session for Salesforce DX, and you all are in for an absolute treat. We've got great presenters up here for you. Before we get started, and hopefully this is the first time you've seen this, our forward-looking statement, we're going to show you some new things with Salesforce DX, so we will point them out when that happens. So just remember, when you're making buying decisions, don't make them on those things, unless they're GA. All right. Now, what can't be said about these two people? I think they are kind of celebrities in the Salesforce universe. I think we all know that. So they're going to show you a lot of amazing capabilities, and the great thing about them is they're going to keep you super entertained the entire time. And trust me, when they're demoing, you know it's real stuff. So with that, I'd like to introduce the David Brent and Michael Scott of the Salesforce platform, Andy Fawcett and Wade Wedner.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. All right, we've been looking forward to this, so thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Andy, for coming as well. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's the job, you know.
So we have been spending a lot of time talking about what should we do for this session. And if you know Andy and I, there's a number of things that we both enjoy doing professionally, as well as hobbies. Andy writes a lot of code in his spare time. I have some hobbies as well. So we thought we'd try to incorporate some of these things in today's talk and make it exciting. So how about the first item?
Yeah, of course, you want to see us build an app. We want to build apps. That's recipe number one. What else are we going to do?
So we're gonna build an app, show a lot of demos. Talked about hobbies. One of my hobbies is being a homebrewer. A lot of fun with it. Get a chance to geek out on that as well. So we're going to find a way to incorporate some technology along with homebrewing, beer, locations, venues as well, where you might connect with people, spend some time.
Finally, of course, you guys. So this is an interactive session. We're going to have a little bit of that interaction shortly, and then watch out for some interaction later this evening to be revealed.
So we wanted to actually first start by asking all of you some questions. And let's see, we've got John over there. He's going to do his very best to find someone to go ahead and answer us. We promise we'll make it worth your while. But why don't we start with the first question?
So we're building this app, and we want to make sure that we're covering strategies and technologies that help admins and developers collaborate together, get the best of both those skills. What kind of technologies would the admin use and the developer use to combine their relative skills to build one solution? Some show of hands, very quickly, you'll win some great swag over there.
There's a hand there.
Well, one of the solutions that aligned to what you're saying was I was able to give an invocable method where I does a lot of the heavy lifting and let the admin build the flexible criteria with flow.
Well done, that man.
Awesome. Thank you. That was a great response. So I think John's got something to hand over to you, so thank you. The next is we wanted to know what sort of features should we use to make a secure callout, either to or from Apex. Anyone got any ideas? Saw a hand over there first. John's running.
Come on, this is cool swag. You've got 2 more questions left. More hands, come on, be brave.
So I think there are multiple methods, but the secure one is named credentials. And technically, you can also use a bearer token, but that's pretty much manual. Named credentials is native.
That's great. Yeah, named credentials. We'll be talking about that today.
So, Winter 19 is upon us. I'm sure you've all been delving into the release notes. If you were to think about 2 features, you can name but one, that would help us do notifications. Chap ahead is already ahead of me. Go ahead. Fantastic. So the answer there was the Lightning. There's a new Lightning component to do the EMP API, so you can listen to platform events for your notifications. Fantastic.
And then the last one we thought is, we want to make this interactive. So what might be a way that you could end up integrating with an SMS service in order to, up here, John, this gentleman right here. What's that? So any point is an opportunity, absolutely. Yeah, there's actually a lot of fantastic services out there. that you can end up using for it, and using some of the methods we just talked to actually invoke them and interact with them. So
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Good stuff. The ultimate prize, by the way, is now that you've answered those questions correctly, you get to come up here and do this presentation.
Yeah, actually,
is that okay?
all of you. No.
No, okay.
So we're going to jump right into it. So the rest of our session, the rest of our time is largely going to be focused on building out this app. So why don't we get started? Now, Andy has put the shell of most of this stuff up on his GitHub repo, so feel free to take a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and get started simply by cloning that and grabbing this locally so that we can get started. So one of the values of Salesforce DX is the ability to work against this externalized source. So opening up this project, let's take a look at what it is that we have here. So I'm going to open up and use VS Code. VS Code is the new editor that we've really spent a lot of time trying to provide a fantastic experience. We produce a bunch of extensions for VS Code that really hopefully make that development experience delightful. Now, we're going to walk through this project kind of end to end. But we're going to start where Andy and I, as two developers in this application, started each time we came to work on the next piece of it. And that is how we set up and scripted up the development environments we used for this demo. So I'm going to start here, and will everyone let me know if this is a reasonable enough size to see? Does that look good?
Yeah.
And so I'm going to walk through the basics here of a shell script that you can use both as a developer and invoke it, or even use it as an automated way to set up an environment that your team can take advantage of. And I'm going to try to highlight things that, while we have them documented, they may not necessarily always jump out as best practices and kind of tips and tricks based on just continual usage of this technology. Now, one of the things using the Salesforce CLI that you may have noticed is we have this spinner. Right? There's a spinner, so when you call a command, it at least lets you know that something is happening. Now, one of the things with that spinner is when you're starting to do shell scripting, that's hitting the standard out of that command. That can interfere with taking the results of the command and actually then parsing it and doing something to it. So one of the things that I always like to do in my shell scripts is I actually override some environmental settings here and set the spinner defaults to nothing. And what this does is it actually turns it off so it doesn't interfere with the standard out, and you can end up doing some really nice scripting where you can take the output from the standard out and then do something with it. Now, the next thing I have here is this command called invoke command. Now, the reason I do this is just a function that I call to invoke all my commands. And the reason I do this is twofold. One is it allows me to actually echo out the command so that, let's say I've got this as part of an automation system, it's set up for CI or CD, and I want to go back to those logs at some point and see what happened. This provides a nice way to see exactly what the command was that was executed. Additionally, I like to make this nice for the user as well, and so you can see here how I've set it up so that the command itself actually gets painted a different color. So it makes it visible to the end user as you're looking at those logs. Now, we are going to end up using some JavaScript as part of this demo so that we can end up calling into Salesforce APIs and do some interactivity using many of the techniques that some of you had highlighted. And to do that, we're going to take advantage of a node module as part of this demo. So if you notice here in our project, I have a package.json file. And in here, we've got a Twilio dependency. We're going to use Twilio today. We want to highlight a couple of things about using a third-party provider through that demo. And so using that package, I'm going to do a yarn install. And what that'll do is it'll install the packages that I need locally so that when I write my JavaScript and I want to execute and test things locally, it's there and it's available. Now, the next thing that we've got here is we're going to do this command here where you'll see we're doing sed. Now, sed is a command that you can use to update, let's say, a file with some new values. Now, one of the ways that we're going to provide an integration here today is certainly using named credentials, but we're also going to use custom metadata. And you'll see we've got this custom metadata type right here. We've got an untapped API connection. Let me show you what that is so that I can explain what it is that we're going to be doing in this script. You'll note that here we've got two pieces of information we're going to be using when we talk to the untapped API. It's going to be a client ID and a client secret. Now, the reason I don't have the actual values here in source, well, first of all, I grabbed this from Andy's repo. But second, you don't want to put your secrets into your source code and then commit it into a repo, right? And so what I'm doing here as part of the script is I want to update these values with the actual values that I have local in my environment. So I can use a technique that works not only locally as a developer, but then if I want to automate this script and have it running somewhere else, I can use the same methodology, the same process in order to do that. And so that's what this sed command is doing, is it's really just updating, you see the your client ID and secret with a value that I have locally. And then it's just updating the file. And we're doing this first because we want to get those values into our code such that when we then create an environment and push that source, it actually has those values. Now, the next thing I'm doing is I'm calling a command config set. Now, with Salesforce DX, when you create scratch orgs, you create them against a dev hub. One of the things that you can have, though, is multiple dev hubs. In fact, if any of you have tried to use a scratch org today against a pre-release environment, that'll require you to get a dev hub that's actually set up as part of pre-release, such that you can create a scratch org that is that pre-release environment. And so we're doing something very similar today. We're going to be using an environment to show you some new things that are not yet in production. And so I'm explicitly setting the developer hub that I'm going to use to one that I've got pre-assigned, and I've called that GS0. And then, of course, steps that you've probably seen us show before, we're going to create a scratch org from a scratch org definition file. I'm going to pause here real quick, and I want to highlight a new capability with scratch orgs that you're going to learn more about here this week. And that is called scratch org snapshots. Now, scratch orgs are amazing in that they give you an environment very quickly that's empty. You can push all your source, configure it, use it for development. But one of the things that we've noted from all of you is that getting that environment set up for a more complex scenario can take a lot of time. Let's say you've got some packages that you need to install into the scratch org. You've got some config that you need to set up. In our case, we're not using any packages, but we've got actually a value, a preference that we need to set and enable in the org that today, unfortunately, isn't exposed such that we can do it programmatically. So using the scratch org snapshot, you can create a scratch org, set it up exactly as you want it. We set a pref to enable a capability, you can install some packages, and then you create a snapshot. And you'll get an ID for that snapshot so that then you can plug this into your scratch org config file, and when you create a scratch org using that snapshot, everything you had preset in that original scratch org is already done for you. So in our case, we've got a pref. It was
the multiple contacts to an event.
That's right, which we could only do through the UI. By using a scratch org snapshot, we can have this done ahead of time so that we can automate everything else. Now, one thing I will note is this is still pre-release. When you get a chance to try it, this value will be snapshot, but we're going to use this live, so we're using the value that exists today. Now, just to kind of close this up, once we create the scratch org, we're going to push our source. We've got a couple of perm sets we're going to assign. We've got some sample data that we're going to load here, and let's take a look at that real quick. So we've got this JSON file that's got some information in here. We're basically going to create an event, a Dreamforce Beers event, and we're going to load that as sample data into our scratch org. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to call this command force org display verbose. Now, I will explain why we're doing that in a moment. It's going to be easier to show you than talk to you about it right now in the abstract. But basically, we're going to grab an auth URL that can come back when you end up specifying that verbose command on the force org display. So I've talked too much. Let's go ahead and run this script. So if the Wi-Fi and internet gods are with us, everything should go well. Notice that as part of this script, you can see what the command is that's actually executing. So it's highlighted in blue. And then you can see the output below it. So right now, we're creating that scratch org. Notice that I annotate all these commands with --JSON. That's because I like to make sure that all the output is always set up in JSON so that if I need to come back later and let's say grab a bunch of that JSON and then use a third-party tool to parse it, it makes it really easy. You can certainly do it without JSON and you'll get a human-readable form, but I always like to get that JSON back in case I need to do something about it. And so you can see all these things are happening here. We're going to load our data. And then the last thing it should do is call this command and give us that sfdx auth URL. So here we can see that auth URL. Let me break this down and show you what this is and why this is a powerful capability. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here, and let me break it down here. So there's 4 pieces of useful information in this auth URL. Let me show you what these are. And one more here. Now, we have this documented what the format is, so you don't have to worry about remembering what I say now. But let me show you. This first piece of information here is the client ID. That is going to be the client ID, and this is the client secret that was used when I authenticated into the CLI. Now, this is a default connected app that we actually provide as the default connected app using the CLI so that you don't always have to create your own. So that's where those values come from. These next 2 values, this is actually the refresh token from the Scratch org. Refresh tokens are very special. Hopefully it's long enough and hard enough that none of you can grab it in its entirety, but also note it's a Scratch org, so it'll only last a little while. That's the refresh token for the Scratch org, and that's going to help facilitating ways that we can authenticate into that Scratch org, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And then this right here is the URL that includes also the my domain for the Scratch org. Now, the reason all of this is useful as that command is if we go back here and we take a look at the CLI, there's actually a command in the CLI here that you can use to authenticate called force auth sfdx URL store. And so you can take that URL and actually, with this command, authenticate and create a login directly to an environment just using that URL. Very powerful way to do it. And then from that point on, the CLI is able to use that registered environment and target it for all the operations. I use this a lot in automation. If you take a look at, for instance, the Salesforce build packs for Heroku that interact with pipelines, it is using this technology and this capability to actually authenticate to all the environments that you have set up as part of your pipeline. We're going to use it today as part of the integration for our SMS solution. So at this point, we've run the script. We've got a local environment set up. What I want to highlight is next, the JavaScript that we're going to run to actually interact with a bunch of the things running inside of Salesforce. And so Andy basically gave me some directions. Here's what I need you to do. Here's the API you call, et cetera. And so I've ended up writing a JavaScript function here that's going to do all this for us. I'm going to walk through it real quick here. Basically, this function is going to be called by Twilio. This is actually going to be running on Twilio's platform as part of Twilio functions. There's a bunch of things that it's going to do here. The first thing it's going to do is actually parse out that auth URL so that it can effectively get access to the environment. So we're going to use the refresh token here and invoke the refresh OAuth token flow. Using that refresh token and some of these other secrets, we can actually mint up then an auth token that we can use for subsequent API calls. So to do that, we're going to first basically define the form that we're going to post. You can see here that we're specifying the refresh token auth flow, and we've got all of those secrets that we've set. We're using request, and we're going to end up making an API call. We're going to actually call that URL that we also had as part of the SFDX auth URL, and we're going to call into the token endpoint. You'll see we'll get some response back. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to parse that response. In the body of that response is an access token. And then with that, Andy has, and we're going to see this here soon, we're going to end up, oops, wrong one. We're going to end up calling into an Apex API that Andy has written, an exposed Apex REST API that he's going to walk through here in a moment called Flow Responder. Very cool API. And basically using this, we're going to send in some information that's come in via an SMS message, and we're going to end up getting a response. His flow is going to send a response back to this function. And we're going to take that response, and we're going to end up loading it up, and we're going to then eventually create and send another SMS message back to the sender. So I promise this will be clear here in a moment when we show it live. Basically, an SMS is going to be sent to a phone number that's managed by Twilio. It's going to invoke a function, this function, that's going to authenticate to our Salesforce environment. It's going to end up invoking then a flow, which is going to do something magical. And then it's going to send a response back that's going to come back to this function, and then it's going to end up sending a text message back to the person who sent the original text message. Wow. Clear as day, right? It hopefully will make a lot of sense here shortly. So I've got my function. I want to now test this. So one of the nice things about this is we can end up using all this information And again, remember I did that yarn install, I got that JavaScript. This is actually invoking that function locally. And you see this response right here? We're going to learn more about what that means, but that's actually coming back from a flow. That value here is actually coming back as a response via a flow that's executing in our Scratch org. So what I'm going to do so that we can run this live is we're going to take all of this. Actually, here, we're going to come over here first to Twilio. Now, this Twilio functions is pretty neat, and it's a good way to demonstrate these integrations. One thing we're going to need to do, though, first, is we're going to have to take these values here and update it. Unfortunately, they don't have a programmatic way to do this, so we're just going to very quickly update the environment information that we're going to use so that it knows which Scratch org to connect to. That's the one that we just created. And then I've got a function here set up and already wired up to get that callback. Let's take this JavaScript, put it in here. We're going to save it. And this is going to deploy this, and it'll have it running here in a moment. And there, it's been deployed. So now what we're going to do is we're going to test it again. This time, we're going to do it with just another script that I've written, but we're actually going to do it via an SMS message. So we're testing this live. And here you can see that it's actually invoking it. And again, now we've got a different message coming back from the flow. So this flow is doing something. And I think at this point, Andy, we've demonstrated that we can set up the JavaScript function, the development environment, and everything needed. Why don't we go ahead and hand it off to you and tell us a little bit about this flow.
Awesome. So yeah, real masterclass there from Wade in terms of scripting and setting up your orgs and integrating with external systems. Let's take a deeper look at that endpoint that Wade was hitting with that particular function. So we've got our regular force app folder in here. Inside classes, we can see, we'll save beer action for a little later, and we can see flow responder. So let me just make a bit of space here, and we'll take a deeper look at that. So this is how many people in the audience are familiar with writing REST services via Apex? Ah, good bunch of you. Excellent. So we see here that the class name doesn't really matter so much as the URL that you're giving. So you'll remember from Wade's demo a moment ago is using flow responder. But the asterisk there allows the code to interpret what follows in that URL, and we're using that to extract the flow name and the flow context. So you're already gathered from the Q&A we had at the beginning of this session, we're melding the two, or blending the two worlds of programmatic benefits and features with the declarative features. That's a big theme of this session. So the administrator and developer have worked together, and the administrator wants the benefit of using different flows, so maybe there's a different one for testing purposes or different campaigns that they're running. And they want to be easily able to change those and plug different ones in. So we've made that a dynamic element of this particular Apex function. So why might you be asking, which we have done and wrapped the Flow API, because there is in fact a REST API for Flow. Well, this is an auto-launch flow. How many people are familiar with auto-launch flows versus the more visual ones? Okay, very powerful feature of Flow. If all you thought Flow was about was UI, it's not. It can be invoked headless without any UI. And we're going to use it to drive that conversation that you just saw in the console that Wade was demonstrating later on. You all get a chance to actually contribute to that conversation. So before I open that auto-launch flow and we'll have a look at that, let's just have a look at a key piece of this code. There's a little bit more than we've got time to walk through at the moment, but what we're focusing on here is the ability to dynamically create a flow, like a piece of code, function in your code that does something. We can pass some parameters into that, and we can get some parameters out of it. All we need to know is the flow name and the inputs, and then get the outputs back out of it. What's special about this flow responder is it's actually maintaining some state, because auto-launch flows are stateless by their nature, but we actually want to continue the conversation through. So you guys will be able to dig into this repo and understand a little bit how I've added some state management around auto-launch flows. Let's first of all take a look before I dive into the actual flow and see if you guys can spot something pretty special about the way flows are manifesting in source control. So that's my flow. What's missing from it? That's normally there. The version number's gone. Whoa, so no more version numbers. Yeah, okay, it's a small thing, but right, you know, you can control the version of your flow with source control. You don't have to manage those numbers. So that's gone. So we don't want to look at the actual XML for that. Let's open up our Scratch org and head straight into the flow design. I'll give you a little bit of a tour of what that flow is doing and how that's driving the experience you're about to have. So we're going to flow. Flow, by the way, has a lovely new Lightning Flow designer, which unfortunately we're not demonstrating here, but do check that out. If you want to be on the pilot, you can talk to the Flow team or ourselves afterwards. This is obviously the older Flow designer. We've got a really nice Lightning experience on the way for this one. So this is the flow, and the conversation that you were seeing unfolding in the console there was you sent a message, you got a question back, you answered the question, you got another question back, and eventually through the Q&A, an action was performed. And you can see, without drilling in too much into this, you can see the cascade of the Q&A happening in the flow. Has the flow got a particular answer it needs? No, it hasn't. Then it asks the user for it. Has it got that answer? Then it proceeds to the next question. So we're just using regular decision elements within flow to know whether we got those variable values. Now, because this is an auto-launch flow wrapped in that that Apex code that I wrote, it remembers things. Normally, auto-launch flows don't remember state. This one does. Eventually, everything's fine. We've been asked whether we like beer. We've been asked our name. Sounds like we're interested in the event. Let's go find the event. So we'll look that up with Flow. We'll look for an event called beer. Remember, we've injected the sample data, so we're confident that that exists for this demo. And we're going to go off and do a little bit more. The admin said to the developer, said, well, I'd love to be a little bit more dynamic about my responses. What kind of top beers do they have at this event? How can I get hold of something that's dynamic and give them some hints as to the beer that they might want to drink and experience when they turn up? So there's another favorite of Wade's, which is the untapped service, and somebody laid down the gauntlet in Twitter when we were talking about this to actually combine these two functions together, so that's exactly what we've gone and done. So Wade will be talking about the beer action. Suffice to say, as the gentleman said earlier, that is an invocable action, so we're dipping back into Apex to perform something Flow wouldn't normally allow us to do. We're going to then create the contact on the fly. We're then going to assign that contact to an event. And then to wrap up this demo, we'll dip back into that Lightning API for handling platform events, because that's sending a platform event, because we're eager to know when people register to our service. So there's a lot going on in this flow with a relatively few amount of elements. We're having a conversation, we're creating some contacts, we're sending events, we're calling out to a third-party API. So with that, I'll hand back to Wade, and he'll walk us through the beer action.
All right. So as Andy mentioned, we're going to call out and use an API, the Untapped API, to get some information about the venue where we want to have this event. And so as mentioned, we've got this beer action API. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to just highlight a couple of things here. Notice that it is an invocable method. But a gentleman in the audience mentioned that we can end up using a named credential. So we are using a named credential. That's going to have information about the underlying URI that we're going to call, the actual API URI. But notice that we also want to decorate it with some additional information. So here, we're going to call into the version 4 of that API and get some venue information. Now here's where that client ID and client ID and client secret that we put in the custom metadata come into play, because we're going to use that as part of the URI such that we can end up authenticating into that Untapped API. And then there's a JSON parser, and notice that the response we get back, we have nice typed information here so that I can say untapped.response.venue.topbeers and find out what the top beer at that venue is. The reason we can do this is we took advantage of a service here called JSON to apex.heroku.app, where you can take JSON and have it converted then into the Apex types that you need. And so you can see here, we've got the venue information, location, photos, et cetera. So that gives us a really nice development experience in Apex so that it ends up allowing us to use the information that came back from that API call. And so that's the API call. I think the last thing we want to highlight is how do we make this a little interactive such that when people do indicate they're interested, we can see inside of our org that they're interested. So I'm going to hand it back to Andy to walk us through that.
OK, final bit of code walkthrough before you guys get your hands on this app. Let's take a look at some Aura components. So for Winter 19, there's a couple of new things to draw your attention to. We've certainly got this new, those of you that follow my blog know I love Lightning Experience and all the extra components and facilities you get as developers in it. The utility bar is a wonderful experience. If you've not checked that out, do check out the sort of features you can add to the utility bar at the bottom of the user experience. For Winter 19, we've added a brand new capability that adds a background utility item. It's one that doesn't have a UI. It's just background in the background listening for, in this case, platform events. So we've kind of created that and implemented that interface. We've also highlighted we're using the EMP API, so we're going to subscribe to a platform event that the flow was sending earlier. We noticed that the flow was sending an event. This is going to allow us to listen to that event. We're also going to use the notifications library and send a toast pop-up whenever a new registration arrives. Very quickly, we've also got the summary component. This also uses the EMP API, but also manages a list of top people that have recently subscribed, and that's dynamically updated as well, along with the recipients. So we're going to start a demo of this, and we're going to take a look at how that works. And phones at the ready, because we do have an interactive moment, and this is kind of the proof of the pudding, as it's said. And let's kick it off.
All right, so you'll notice here, as I reset a couple of things, we've got a phone number, so feel free to join me and express some interest in this event. So I'm going to send a text message to the phone number that you see up on the screen, so I'll say, hello. Sorry, I've tried to figure out how to make this a little bigger here in messages, and I can't figure it out. So we've said hello to the service. Any moment, we should end up getting a response back from our flow. Oh, sorry, it's still sending it over Wi-Fi.
Yes. Some of you might have better luck than us at sending this.
Feel free to
start sending.
If you go through this experience as well, there is a part where, there you go, we got the response. So it asked me, do you like beer? That was one of those actions. And I'll say, yes, I do. And indicate that I do. And so now it knows, OK, so we got a response. Let's share some of the information about the venue. So when eventually this SMS message gets sent, a couple of things are going to happen. It's going to end up not only sending the final response with some information about the venue, but Andy indicated all of those elements using EMP API to be able to highlight not only with a toast in the org, but also the latest registrations. And hopefully, all of this should come together, and we should see some updates here in a moment. All right, this is a live demo. We promised you live code, live demo.
Live Wi-Fi. Oh, there we go.
All right, there we go.
So this is flowing through those steps in the flow. It's going through that.
All right, so someone already did this. So someone was able to do this faster. Oh, here we go. We got some more.
Wonderful.
We've got a yes and a no. Indicated Wade Wegner, and then ultimately this should end up providing that toast as well, and we'll get a response. As we wait, and this ends up updating, there we can see we've got some more registrations. I wonder if we've got a bug in our flow.
I think we might have a little bug there. Yeah.
We're showing yeses and nos.
It does show we're in some traffic.
All right, maybe it was something different. So there we go. Mike Stewart, thank you. Going to join us. Should have the information there. I will be there as well. Basically, we wanted to make this interactive, right? Show you guys some of the new technology. Highlight. Here we go. There we got a lot of people. So. As part of this, there's some venue information that was sent back as the response. Andy and I will be hanging out there from 6:30 to 7:30. If you want to join us, we'd love to catch up. It'll provide a great opportunity for us to answer any questions that you have today about what you saw, about the code, how it all worked. And yeah, hopefully that was good. We're not done yet, though. I want to go back here to slides and highlight a couple of other things. So. We just showed a lot of stuff. So we want to kind of recap and highlight to everyone what it was that you just saw. We've probably missed a few things, but Andy and I went through and said, these are the things that we really highlighted as part of this. So Scratch org snapshots, new fantastic capability that you can start to use so that you can lay down a set of defaults in an environment, and then every time you create the new Scratch org, take advantage of it. I'll just read off a couple of others. Name credentials. We use that along with the custom metadata types to connect to the Untapped API. EMP API. You saw all the interactivity and all those updates finally coming through the system. All that is just using a new Lightning component for EMP API.
We embraced permission sets. If you're new to those, definitely check those out. Profiles are not great for decomposing your org. Permission sets are a great tool for that. So we definitely decompose this demo into two concerns. Flows ultimately gave us that balance of leveraging the flexibility of the admin skills, the ability to customize the solution. Custom metadata is an awesome way of managing configuration. You don't have to rekey that information. You can move that around readily with change section packaging. So custom metadata allowed us to capture that config very nicely.
We spent some time up front looking at some advanced techniques with scripting, something that I think is not only fun to do, but incredibly useful so that you can take the best of DX, which allows you to create these environments that you recreate from scratch each time in a known state and automate that process so that you can end up knowing that everything that you need as a developer or as an automated process doing CI or a release, all of that stuff can be done in a consistent way. Andy highlighted how we've got a new and improved DX experience for Flow. We don't have the version numbers built into it as well so that you can version it using source control. We showed some opportunities and ways with which you can generate and update files, do some data loading. The SFDX auth URL is a fantastic tool that you can use to provide different ways in which you can authenticate into environments that you have created using a very simple URL. We demonstrated the OAuth refresh token flow. So using that refresh token and the client ID and secret, we were able to get an access token that we could use for subsequent calls.
Last but not least, platform events. We fired that platform event from Flow. We used the new Lightning component in Winter 19. So very easily, with a few lines of code, didn't actually end up showing the controller code. You guys can check that from the repo. But it was a few lines of code to listen to that event and respond to that and interact with the other APIs in Lightning. So platform events becoming really nicely integrated with the Lightning experience at Winter 19.
Now, since we covered so many things, we only ended up being able to go so deep. So there's a lot of additional resources that you can take advantage of. Obviously, on Trailhead, we've got a bunch of modules you can go through, get some badges, level up, and really walk through. There's a whole bunch of things we didn't even cover, like the last step of all of this, of course, would end up being then using packaging to take what we've built and get it installed into our target environment. So, take a look at unlocked packages for customers, which is a fantastic module that you can use. And then for those of you that noticed we started at Git and GitHub, we've got Trailhead modules walking through how you can start using Git in order to drive a lot of these experiences as well. Now, we've also got a lot of really good sessions. There is a trail guide that shows everything, but I want to highlight a number of them here. First of all, organizing and deploying metadata using unlocked packages. Going to be a fantastic session that'll talk about how you can think about what you put into the unlocked package and how you can get to a place where you can really leverage and harness the power of unlocked packages. One of the things Andy is very keen on, and he's blogged a lot about, is dependency injection. And so there is a session on the value of dependency injection. We find this to be a great technique to use as part of decoupling the org, using dependency injection to inject those things such that you can more easily decouple your source and take advantage then of things like packaging as a deployment.
We've got an excellent session with Carmax. You should definitely attend that. Carmax is really focused on their process of adopting DX. And it's a great story to listen to how they did their planning, their due diligence, how they engaged their developers in their organization and took them with the journey. So if you're interested in actually how you actually get the wheel turning with DX, it's getting big, it's lots of parts to it. How do you actually experience that and run that through your organization? Carmax has really mastered that approach, and it's well worth listening to their story and how they got things going and their recipe for success.
Of course, we're going to have the platform keynote later today. And so John, who introduced us, will actually be a part of that, highlighting many of these things as well. It's going to be a fantastic session, so do join us at the platform keynote. And then, of course, the developer keynote later this week. Great opportunity to see all kinds of things, including a lot of the capabilities that MuleSoft brings to the platform. So do join us also at the developer keynote on Thursday. And with that, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Hopefully you've enjoyed this session, and have a great Dreamforce.